I should have listened to what my husband was saying in his sleep. I'm not what you'd call a sound sleeper. It generally takes me hours to fall asleep, and when I finally do, I can be woken by something as slight as a mouse fart. My husband, on the other hand, once slept through a storm so violent that it smashed all our bedroom windows and drove a tree through our car windshield. He was such a heavy sleeper that I used to listen to him breathe just to reassure myself that he was still alive. One night as I lay in bed, resigned to another few hours of intense boredom and general fatigue as I waited to fall asleep, my slumbering husband started murmuring in his sleep. He'd never done this before, so I rolled over and cuddled up to his chest, my head resting just under his mouth. His warm breath tickled my ear, and his murmurs slowly began to become intelligible. At first it was just nonsense, random whisperings and made-up words. I fell asleep listening to his quiet babble, smiling to myself when I occasionally caught my name interspersed between the gibberish. This began to happen more frequently, and over the period of a week or so, he began to form full sentences and carry on one-sided conversations which would slowly lull me to sleep. One night, as I lay almost dozing, his breathing became shallow and fast and his voice rose in panic. "Who is he? Can't you see him? He doesn't look right. His face." I sat up and put my hand on his chest. "God, he's ugly. He's not right. Why aren't you doing anything?" He was sweating heavily and tears began to trickle down his cheek. "Don't let him on board. He's looking right at me. He's staring right at me. Why aren't you doing anything?" As he screamed the last sentence, I shook him awake with as much force as I could. He bolted upright and inhaled deeply. I put my hand to his clammy face and he turned and looked at me blankly. He gripped me in a sudden hug and refused to let go. Eventually we both fell asleep like that, and in the morning he had no recollection of the dream or the sweaty aftermath. This happened several more nights afterwards, each time more violent and unnerving than the last. He began to wake up tired and drained and he became unable to concentrate on his work and felt curiously depressed. I took him to see our family doctor and insisted he be given sleeping tablets, herbal remedies, counseling, anything to stamp out these night terrors that were affecting him so profoundly. We went home with a prescription and a glimmer of hope that he may get a full night's sleep. We went to bed that night exhausted. He popped the pills he'd been given and slipped quickly into a deep sleep. I breathed a sigh of relief and went about packing his suitcase for a work trip he was due to take in the morning. I had the lights on and didn't have to mind about the level of noise I was making. He was out cold. I finished packing his suits, his laptop and his toiletries and decided to call it a night. I clambered into bed beside him and lay on my back, staring into the darkness, willing sleep to come. I was on the very edge of consciousness, about to fall into blackness, when I heard him whisper. I groaned and rolled over. I gasped as I saw him lying face up with his eyes wide open. "Look down there. Look at what they're loading in. It's a coffin. That's not a fucking suitcase, it's a coffin. Oh God, oh God, oh God." He kept moaning for God until his voice weakened and was eventually drowned out by his crying. I tried to wake him, but no amount of shaking or calling his name would work. His eyes closed after a while, but he continued to cry until, without warning, he went silent. I held my breath and looked at him in fear. He's there. He's staring at me through the windscreen. He's looking right at me. Oh, Lord, his face. And with that, he fell back asleep, almost peacefully, as though nothing had happened. I dropped back onto the bed and hugged my knees to my chest, physically and mentally drained from another session of night terrors. I must have slept at some point, because the next thing I knew I was waking up alone in bed, with daylight pouring in through the windows. I groggily shook my head, still thick with exhaustion, and reached for my phone as my message tone went off. I had several messages from my husband which I scrolled through with bleary eyes. "Husband, you were snoring and drooling like a baby, so I didn't want to wake you. Thanks for packing for me, darling. I'll see you in a few days." "Husband, those tablets worked a charm. I feel fantastic. Might have a cheeky beer while I'm waiting in the airport lounge, smile." "Husband, think I just saw the pilot at the bar? First off, I hope that's just soda he's drinking, and secondly, damn. He's one ugly motherfucker. Hideous bastard stared right at me for ages. Gave me the creeps. Looks familiar though. Do we know any ugly people?" I felt my heart drop and I turned ice cold. "Husband, about to board, love you lots." The next message told me that I had missed a call from him, but that he had left a voicemail. With shaking hands, I dialed the number and held the phone to my ear. A blast of noise and muffled screaming blared out at me, followed by my husband's voice, "Darling. Oh God, darling, I think we're going down. I think I'm going to die. I love you. I love you so much, baby. Oh God, oh God, oh God." Silence. I felt the phone drop from my hand and vomit rise in the back of my throat. I blacked out. Later that day, I don't know when, my husband's manager must have let himself in because I was shaken awake by him and told that something terrible had happened. My husband's plane had gone down on the outskirts of the city, with no survivors. A few weeks passed, and my husband's remains were recovered. I buried what little remained of him and waited for answers from the airline. There were no technical failures and the black box had recorded nothing. The only thing they had to go on was the possibility of pilot error. But as the investigation continued, they could find nothing on the pilot. Not as in they couldn't find any history of mistakes or poor flight, as in they could find literally nothing. The airline had no record of him. No one had seen him before, no one knew where he came from, and no one knew who he was. But I think my husband did.